Marcus, you're standing by my ICU bed, smiling like a saint while you hand me a codicil you claim I signed 3 hours before my heart stopped. You think because I'm hooked up to a morphine drip and a heart monitor, I can't see the hesitation marks in the ink. You think because I'm 72, I've forgotten the 30 years I spent at the FBI laboratory pulling the truth out of forged ransom notes and counterfeit bonds. You didn't just forge my signature, Marcus. You tried to forge a man who spent his life studying the exact way a liar's hand shakes. And before this IV bag is empty, I'm going to show you why you never, ever try to outwrite a forensic document examiner. Welcome back to Payback Logs. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I am Elias Thorne. To my son-in-law Marcus, I'm just a retired paper pusher with a decent pension and a very valuable mountain estate in Aspen. He sees a man who wears bifocals and forgets where he put his car keys. What he forgets is that for 3 decades, I was a senior specialist in the questioned documents unit of the FBI. I don't just read paper, I listen to it. I look at the microscopic craters left by a ballpoint pen. I analyze the chemical composition of toner. I can tell you if a document was signed on a kitchen table or a leather desk pad based solely on the microscopic indentations in the fibers. I woke up on Tuesday afternoon with a chest that felt like it had been hit by a freight train. The bypass surgery was a success, but the post-op fog was thick. Through the haze of the recovery room, I saw Marcus. He wasn't holding flowers. He was holding a clipboard. "Elias, you're awake," Marcus whispered, his voice dripping with a fake, oily relief. "The doctors were worried, but I told them you're a fighter. I'm just so glad we got that administrative detail out of the way before you went under. It's a weight off everyone's mind." He held up a single sheet of paper. It was a codicil to my last will and testament. It stated that in the event of my incapacity, the Thorne Mountain estate at its $2.4 million in equity would be transferred to a family trust managed solely by Marcus. At the bottom was a signature that looked remarkably like mine. I don't remember signing that, Marcus," I rasped, my voice sounding like sandpaper. "Oh, you were very lucid, Elias," Marcus said, patting my hand. "You were worried about Sarah and the kids. You wanted to make sure the burden of the property was handled by someone with a business mind. You even had 2 of the nurses witness it. It's all legal and tight. Don't you worry about a thing. Just rest." I looked at the signature. To the average person, or even a standard notary, it was perfect. It had the slight age-related drag on the E and the characteristic loop in the T. But as I looked at it through the forensic lens I've spent a lifetime honing, I saw the initial spur. When I sign my name, I have a subconscious flick at the start of the E, a microscopic upward stroke that comes from 30 years of fast-paced bureaucratic signing. The signature on Marcus's paper was too slow. It was drawn, not written. It had line quality issues, the tiny tremors that occur when a forger is trying too hard to be precise. "It looks official," I whispered, closing my eyes. "It's more than official, Elias," Marcus said, his voice brimming with a triumph he couldn't quite hide. "It's your legacy. I'll keep it safe in my office until you're back on your feet." He tucked the paper away and walked out of the ICU, probably already calling a real estate agent in Aspen. I didn't call the nurse. I didn't scream. I reached into the drawer of my bedside table and pulled out my smartphone. I didn't open a game. I opened an app that connects to my home server, the one that stores the high-resolution scans of every document I've signed in the last 10 years. "Type justice in the comments," I whispered to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Because Marcus thinks he's looking at a dying man, he doesn't realize he's looking at a work in progress, and I'm about to provide the final analysis. By Wednesday morning, The hospital room had become my observation deck. I knew that if I confronted Marcus now, he'd simply destroy the original document and claim I was hallucinating due to the post-op meds. In a forgery case, the document is the body, and you never alert the killer before you've secured the corpse. When the nurse came in to check my vitals, I put on the performance of a lifetime. I stared blankly at the wall. I asked her what year it was 3 times. I let my hand shake when I reached for a cup of water. When Marcus arrived at noon, carrying a get-well balloon that looked as cheap as his soul, he saw exactly what he wanted, a man whose brain was as fragile as his heart. "Elias, how are we feeling?" he asked, leaning over the bed. "The nurse said you were a little disoriented this morning." I can't quite get the dates right, Marcus," I whispered, trailing off. "And that paper from yesterday, the one about the mountain house, I keep thinking, did I sign that in the kitchen or was it the study?" Marcus's eyes lit up. This was the green light for a predator. He realized that not only could he get away with the first forgery, but he could also clean up the rest of my estate while I was still under the fog. "You signed it right here, Elias," Marcus lied, his voice soothing. "But you mentioned wanting to update the power of attorney for your brokerage accounts too. You said you didn't want Sarah to have to worry about the math while you're recovering. I have the forms right here. All I need is your mark to make it official." He pulled out a fresh set of documents. He didn't even try to hide the pen, a standard black felt tip. I'm too tired to hold the pen, Marcus," I said, letting my head loll to the side. "Can't you just use the signature from the other one? You said it was legal and tight." "I'll handle it, Elias," Marcus said, patting my arm with a terrifying coldness. "I'll take these home, get them organized, and bring the copies back for you to see tomorrow. You just close your eyes." As soon as he left, I sat up. The shaking stopped. My eyes sharpened. I pulled my tablet from the hidden pocket of my robe. I had installed a high-resolution, motion-activated nanny cam in a tissue box on the nightstand the night before the surgery, disguised as a gift from my granddaughter. I played back the footage from the last hour. I watched Marcus on the screen. While I slept, he had sat in the guest chair practicing my signature on a legal pad. I watched his hand movements. He was using finger movement instead of arm movement I've used for 50 years. Finger movement produces blunted ends, where the pen stays on the paper a millisecond too long at the end of a stroke. But then I saw the real prize. Marcus had pulled a document out of his bag to use as a template. It was an old tax return of mine he'd stolen from my study. I watched him trace the signature against the hospital window, using the afternoon sun as a makeshift lightbox. Rule number 4 of document examination: a traced signature is the DNA of a forgery. It lacks pressure graduation. A real signature has thin lines where the pen moves fast and thick lines where it slows down. A trace is a uniform, dead line. I took a screenshot of the video, the exact moment Marcus had his tongue poked out in concentration, tracing my name like a third grader. "You're building a mountain of evidence, Marcus," I whispered, the open loop widening to include his entire criminal process. "And the higher you build it, the further you're going to fall. Tomorrow, I'm going to ask to see the originals, and I'm bringing the microscope." "Type justice in the comments," I murmured to the empty room. Because Marcus thinks he's writing a check. He doesn't realize he's writing a confession. I was discharged on Friday morning. Marcus insisted on driving me home, playing the part of the dutiful son-in-law to the hospital staff. He helped me into my favorite armchair in the living room, adjusted my pillows, and placed the black briefcase, the one containing my new future, on the coffee table. "I've got the originals right here, Elias," Marcus said, his voice brimming with a greasy confidence. "I'll just leave them on your desk in the study so you can review them when your head clears. I've already had them notarized by a friend of mine. Everything is official." "Thank you, Marcus," I whispered, closing my eyes. "I just need a long nap. The medicine, it makes the room spin. "Take all the time you need," he said, heading for the door. "I'll check in on you tomorrow. We can talk about the estate sale then." As soon as his SUV cleared the driveway, the spin stopped. I stood up, my chest still aching from the bypass, but my mind sharper than a surgical scalpel. I didn't go to my bedroom. I went to the basement, to the room Marcus called my hobby shop. To the FBI, it was known as Laboratory Site 4. I flipped the heavy industrial switches. A row of specialized lights hummed to life: ultraviolet, infrared, and a high-intensity coaxial light. In the center of the room sat my pride and glory, a video spectral comparator, VSC. I took the Codicil Marcus had left on my desk and placed it under the VSC. "Let's look at the ink library, Marcus," I murmured. "Every pen leaves a chemical fingerprint. In the bureau, we have a database of thousands of ink formulas." I adjusted the light to the infrared spectrum. Suddenly, the truth was glowing on the monitor. My real signature from an old document was written with a Parker Quink permanent black. It stayed dark and solid under the IR light. But the signature on the Codicil, it started to drop out. It flickered and turned translucent. It was a Bic crystal black, a cheap oil-based ballpoint ink. "You use a 10-cent pen to steal a $2 million house, Marcus," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "Metamerism never lies. You can match the color to the naked eye, but you can't match the molecular structure of the pigment." I moved the document to the ESDA. I applied a thin film of plastic over the paper and charged it with static electricity. Then I poured a fine black toner over the surface. This is the ghost of the pen. When you write on a pad of paper, the pressure leaves microscopic indentations on the pages beneath it. I watched as the toner settled into the grooves. It didn't show my signature. It showed Marcus's handwriting from the page he'd been using above the Codicil while he was practicing. "Too shaky. More loop on the T. Remember the E spur." There it was, a handwritten instruction manual for his own forgery, ghosted onto the very document he was trying to pass as my will. I grabbed my camera and took a macro photo of the ESDA results. "You didn't just forge my name, Marcus," I whispered, the open loop now a forensic trap. "You left your practice sheets embedded in the evidence. Tomorrow is the celebration dinner, and I'm going to serve you a plate of your own handwriting." "Type justice in the comments," I murmured to the glowing monitors, "because in the world of questioned documents, the paper remembers everything, especially the things you tried to hide." Saturday morning, the house was quiet, but the air felt heavy with the scent of a closing trap. I called my daughter, Sarah. I didn't use the house phone. Marcus had installed a smart home system last Christmas that I suspected had a remote listen feature. I used an old burner phone I kept in my emergency kit. "Sarah, honey, come over. Bring the kids' old scrapbooks. I want to look at some family history." When she arrived, she looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she kept glancing at her watch, a watch Marcus had bought her with a bonus he hadn't actually earned yet. "Dad, Marcus says you're still very confused," she whispered as we sat in the sunroom. He says you might have had a microstroke. He told me we need to start looking at liquidation options for the Aspen house to cover your long-term care." I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a high-resolution macro photo. "Look at this, Sarah," I said, sliding the image across the table. It was the ESDA scan from my lab. "What is it? It looks like ghostly writing?" "It's called indented writing," I said, my voice steady and professional. "It's what happens when someone writes on a notepad resting on top of another sheet of paper. This is the ghost of Marcus's handwriting pressed into the fibers of the codicil he says I signed in the ICU. Read the words, Sarah." She squinted at the photo, her breath hitched. "Remember the E spur? Make it look shaky." He practiced, Sarah, I said. He sat in my hospital room while I was unconscious, and he practiced my signature until he felt he could pass it off. And then he used a Bic ballpoint, a pen I haven't owned in 20 years, to sign my life away. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, but the look on her face wasn't just shock, it was a sickening realization. Dad, yesterday I saw a notification on Marcus's laptop. It was a letter of intent from a developer in Aspen. They were offering $3 million for the mountain lot. The closing date was set for next Friday. He told me he was just researching the value for your insurance. He's already sold it, Sarah, I said. In his mind, the house is already gone. And look at the witness line on the document Marcus showed the notary. I pointed to the bottom of the forged codicil. There was a signature that looked exactly like Sarah's. I never signed that, she gasped. I was in the cafeteria getting coffee when the nurses were in your room. I know. He forged yours, too. He's setting you up as a co-conspirator. If I die and this will is contested, the state looks at you as the primary witness. He's using you as his human shield against a fraud charge. Sarah didn't cry. She went cold. It's a trait she got from me, the forensic freeze. When the evidence is undeniable, the emotion disappears and the protocol takes over. What do we do, Dad? I said. We invite him to the celebration dinner tonight. I've told him I'm feeling miraculously better. I told him I want to notarize the rest of the brokerage transfers in person. I want him to bring the original master will and every updated document he's created. He'll suspect something, she warned. No, I said, a grim smile touching my lips. A forger's greatest weakness is his own ego. He thinks he's smarter than the old Fed. He thinks he's won, and when a man thinks he's won, he stops looking for the tripwire. Type justice in the comments as Sarah gripped my hand, because Marcus wanted to sell the family history. He's about to find out that some things, like a daughter's loyalty and a father's expertise, can't be forged. Saturday afternoon, the house was a hive of quiet, lethal preparation. I wasn't just setting a table, I was staging a crime scene. While Sarah went to distract Marcus by taking him out for an expensive lunch, a celebration of my recovery, I went into their shared home office. I didn't need a search warrant. I had the parental key and a lifetime of knowing exactly where a guilty man hides his ledger. I found Marcus's private tablet hidden inside an old hollowed-out medical encyclopedia. I bypassed the 4-digit passcode in under 30 seconds, his wedding anniversary, predictable. I didn't look for emails. I looked at the banking app. My heart, still healing from the bypass, gave a painful thud. Their joint savings account, which had held $85,000 for the kids' college and their mortgage buffer, was sitting at $412. I scrolled through the transferred history. Thursday, 4:15 p.m., $15,000, withdrawal, cash. Friday, 9 a.m., $20,000, transfer to Blackwood Legal Services. Blackwood wasn't a law firm. It was a notary mill in the shady part of the city, the kind of place where a $100 bill buys a verified stamp on a blank piece of paper. Marcus hadn't just forged my name, he'd emptied his own children's future to pay off the people who helped him steal mine. I returned to the dining room. I didn't set out the fine china, I set out my tools. I placed a high-resolution digital microscope inside a large hollowed-out centerpiece of dried flowers. I ran a thin fiber-optic cable under the lace tablecloth to a tablet hidden behind the sideboard. I set up a UV light bar discreetly tucked into the molding of the plate rail above the table. When you're a forensic document examiner, you don't need a courtroom to prove a lie. You just need the right wavelength of light. Sarah returned at 5 p.m., her face pale. She met me in the kitchen while Marcus was upstairs freshening up and admiring himself in the mirror. "Dad," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I checked the safe at our house while he was in the shower. The kids' college bonds, they're gone. He's cashed them out. He told me he was reinvesting them into a high-yield fintech fund. He's literally betting our kids' lives on this Aspen sale." "He's not betting, Sarah," I said, handing her a glass of water. "He's desperate. He's already spent money he hasn't stolen yet. That's the gambler's itch. He's so far underwater, he thinks the only way to breathe is to drown us." "How do we start?" she asked. "We wait for the soup," I said. "I've told him I'm having trouble seeing the fine print on the new brokerage transfers. I'm going to ask him to help me align the signatures. I want him to put the original codicil right under the microscope lens." I heard Marcus's footsteps on the stairs, the heavy, arrogant stride of a man who thinks he's the smartest person in the room. "Elias! Sarah!" Marcus boomed, walking into the dining room, wearing a brand-new Italian blazer. "The house smells wonderful. A celebration is exactly what we need. To family, right? And to a very bright, very secure future." I looked at him. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. I saw the way he clutched his briefcase like a life preserver. "To the future, Marcus," I said, my voice as cold as a morgue slab, "and to the paper trail that leads us there." "Type justice in the comments," I whispered as we sat down to eat, because Marcus thinks he's the guest of honor. He doesn't realize he's the Exhibit A in a forensic masterclass. The soup was served, a simple tomato bisque that matched the color of the red flags Marcus had been dropping all week. He was eating with the gusto of a man who had already mentally spent the $3 million from the Aspen sale. He kept patting his briefcase, which sat on the chair next to him like a third guest at the table. "Elias, you look remarkably sharp tonight," Marcus said, wiping his mouth with a silk pocket square. "The recovery is a miracle, but we shouldn't delay. The bank closes their high-value transfer window on Monday morning. If we get these brokerage signatures done tonight, I can drop them off in the night box." "You're right, Marcus," I said, my voice thin and slightly wavering. The vulnerable grandpa mask was back on. "But my eyes, the cataracts are acting up since the surgery. I can't seem to see where the line starts on these new forms. I don't want to make a messy mark and have the bank reject it." I pulled the new power of attorney forms he'd given me in the ICU and laid them on the lace tablecloth, right over the hidden fiber optic cable. "Marcus, be a sport," I said. "Bring out the original codicil, the one you said I signed so perfectly in the hospital. I want to use it as a template to align my hand. If I can see the exact angle of my signature under this magnifying lamp, I can replicate it." Marcus hesitated for a microsecond. A smarter man would have smelled the ozone of the trap, but greed is a powerful anesthetic. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out the original codicil, the golden ticket to the Aspen estate. "Of course, Elias," he said, sliding the paper over. "Here, look at the flow. See how the E sweeps upward. You were very decisive that day." He placed the document exactly where I needed it, directly over the digital microscope hidden in the floral centerpiece. I reached over and flicked a switch on the underside of the table. Suddenly, the large flat-screen TV in the dining room, usually displaying a slideshow of family photos, flickered to life. But it wasn't showing the grandkids at the beach. It was showing a 400x magnification of the signature on the codicil. Every fiber of the paper looked like a giant log. Every stroke of the pen looked like a river of black sludge. "What is this?" Marcus asked, his fork freezing halfway to his mouth. "Elias, what's on the TV?" "It's a visual aid, Marcus," I said, my voice losing the tremor and turning into the cold, clinical tone of an FBI expert witness. "I want you to look at the micro-tremors in that signature. See those jagged edges on the downward stroke? That's called forger's hesitation. It happens when a hand is drawing a shape rather than writing a name." I tapped a button on my tablet. The screen split. On the left was the codicil. On the right was a verified signature from my 1995 FBI service record. Now look at the ink feathering. The ink on the right is a high-grade pigment that's soaked into the cotton fibers of the paper. The ink on the left, your Bic Special, is sitting on top of the surface like oil on water. And look at the initial spur I mentioned. You missed it by 3 microns, Marcus. Marcus stood up so fast his chair toppled over. This is some kind of senile prank. Sarah, tell him. He's had a breakdown." Sarah didn't move. She didn't look at him. She was staring at the screen where I had just toggled the UV light filter. Under the ultraviolet light, a glowing, ghostly image appeared on the blank parts of the codicil. It was the indented writing from the page Marcus had used to practice. "Make it look shaky. Remember the E-spur." The words glowed neon blue against the white paper, an indelible confession written in the pressure of his own hand. "That's your handwriting, Marcus," I said, standing up and leaning over the table. "Caught in the ghost of the pen. You didn't just forge my will, you left a roadmap of your crime embedded in the fibers of the evidence." "Type justice in the comments," I whispered to the terrified man across the table. "Because the old Fed didn't have a micro stroke. He just had a micro lens, and you're currently in the sharpest focus of your life." The silence in the dining room was broken only by the hum of the digital microscope. Marcus's face went from a frantic flush to the color of damp parchment. He looked at the glowing blue confession on the TV screen, then at the briefcase, then at the exit. "This is a setup," Marcus hissed, his voice cracking like dry wood. "You're an old man playing with toys, Elias. That ghost writing isn't real. It's a digital trick. I'm taking my property and I'm leaving." He lunged across the lace tablecloth, his hands clawing for the original codicil. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Sarah didn't even flinch. Marcus grabbed the paper, crumpling the edges of the $3 million lie, and bolted for the foyer. "We're done here, Sarah. I'm calling my lawyer. You can keep your forensic father in his basement lab." He ripped open the front door, ready to disappear into the night. He stopped, dead. Standing on the porch, flanked by 2 uniformed officers, was a man in a cheap, sweat-stained suit holding a heavy ledger. It was Leo, the stamp Miller, the notary from the back alley office Marcus had paid $20,000 to verify the forgery. "Leo," Marcus whispered, the document fluttering in his hand like a dying bird. "What are you doing here?" "He's here to fulfill his notary duty, Marcus," I said, walking slowly into the foyer, my hand resting on the doorframe for support. "He's already given a sworn statement to the Economic Crimes Unit. He's admitted that you brought him a pre-signed document and he stamped it in exchange for a donation to his gambling debts." Officer Miller, the younger one who had been my protege back at the bureau, stepped forward. He didn't pull his weapon. He pulled a pair of latex gloves. "I'll take that, Marcus," the officer said, gently but firmly, removing the crumpled codicil from Marcus's numb fingers. "This is now evidence item number 1. We've already matched the toner on your printer at home to the power of attorney forms, and we've got the CCTV from the hospital of you tracing signatures against the window." Marcus looked at Sarah. He looked for a spark of the woman who had loved him, the woman he thought he could control. But Sarah was holding the burner phone, her finger hovering over the send button on a file containing every transfer he'd made from their children's savings. "You didn't just steal from my father, Marcus. You stole from our children. You sold their future for a piece of land in the mountains. You're not a business mind. You're just a common thief who got caught by a man who taught the world how to catch you." Type justice in the comments as the handcuffs clicked shut over Marcus's wrists, because when you try to forge a thorn, you don't just lose the house, you lose the game, and the forensic review is officially over. The dust in the dining room didn't just settle, it was vacuumed up by a forensics team. Marcus was processed through the county jail, his Italian blazer replaced by a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. He didn't get a phone call to a developer in Aspen. He got a public defender who told him the evidence was mathematically insurmountable. 6 months later, the gavel fell for real. 8 years in state prison. Charges: grand theft, elder financial abuse, and multiple counts of aggravated forgery. Because I had flipped Leo the notary, the state was able to seize Leo's professional insurance bond and Marcus's hidden fintech accounts. We didn't just stop the theft, we performed a financial restoration. Every cent of the $85,000 for the kids' college fund was recovered, plus interest. I stood on the deck of the mountain house in Aspen. The air was thin, cold, and smelled of pine, a far cry from the antiseptic stench of the ICU. Sarah was next to me, watching her children run through the meadow. The house wasn't a liquid asset to be traded for a debt. It was a sanctuary. "He almost did it, Dad," Sarah said, leaning against the railing. "If you hadn't looked at the E-spur, if you hadn't known about the ink." "The truth is always there, Sarah," I said, looking at the jagged peaks of the Rockies. "It's written in the fibers. It's ghosted in the pressure. A liar can change his story, but he can't change the physics of a pen hitting paper." I walked into the small study of the mountain cabin. I opened my old FBI field kit, the one Marcus thought was a hobby. I pulled out a fresh sheet of heavy, cream-colored vellum. I took my Parker Quink fountain pen, the one with the permanent IR-stable ink, and I wrote a single sentence at the bottom of my actual will. "The Thorne legacy is not for sale. It is earned through the truth of the hand and the strength of the heart." I signed it. I didn't rush. I let the initial spur flick upward, a microscopic signature of a life lived with precision. I didn't need a crooked notary. I had my daughter, my grandkids, and a career's worth of integrity as my witnesses. I closed the folder and locked it in the floor safe. I wasn't an ICU patient anymore. I wasn't a broke grandpa. I was Elias Thorne, and my record was officially clean. "Type justice in the comments," I whispered as the sun dipped below the peaks. Because in the end, Marcus was right about one thing. I was a fighter. He just forgot that I fight with the most dangerous weapon on earth, the truth. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this sphere.